So the question is it possible to match cognitive brain span to our extended lifespan? I don't know how many of you have read Michael Kinsley's excellent piece in the New Yorker. Mike and I were colleagues at the New Republic in the early 1980s, but one of the points that he makes is that the baby boom generation is the first generation to really worry about declining cognitive ability, because previous generations, most of them, anyway, sort of way back, didn't live long enough to have to worry about it, and I think the current generation that's in its 80s and 90s didn't know about Alzheimer's and some of the other diseases that are associated with cognitive degeneration. So we have a fabulous panel to talk about healthy aging. Keith Epstein is a senior strategic advisor. He's right there for the AARP, the largest seniors organization. Dr. Lee Dockery with the McKnight Brain Research Foundation. Dr. Molly Wagster, Chief of the Behavioral and Systems Neuroscience Branch of the Division of Neuroscience of the National Institute on Aging, and Dr. Chapman. So I will kick things off by asking Dr. Chapman's a kind of an open-ended question. What is the potential of the brain in healthy aging? In other words, if cognitive decline is supposed to begin at age 42, is there anything we can do about that?
This is a question that we've been addressing really for the last 25 years, is what is going on with the aging brain. And what I wish is, when I hear Libby Doggett talking, is that we would think about the older brain much like we do the young brain, that it requires a lot of nurturing, because our brain retains immense capacity to be regenerated, to build resilience till the end of life. And we truly have not taken advantage of it. We know physically that when we begin to do things, you can get muscle mass back, but mentally, we never really thought about our brain as something that could be stronger, and it truly is how we use it that's going to make it stronger. In a study that was funded by the National Institute on Aging that was published several months ago, we showed healthy people in a randomized trial of mental activity, and it was really short-term, versus physical activity versus a weightless control. And the people that engaged in mental activity, and it was just over 12 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, we did brain imaging, cognitive testing, real-life function. We found the individuals showed significant changes, not only in cognition, abstraction, problem-solving, thinking at big levels, but at all levels of brain. Increased brain blood flow, increase in the speed of communication across our major networks, and increase in white matter integrity. We didn't know that that level of strengthening was possible in healthy aging. So, and there's more and more studies that are becoming like that. And I think what we're interested in is you're never too old. One of the participants was 87, and they said, I was still working. I felt at the top of my game, but after I realized how much I was really bogged down in slowness in thinking, he said, now I am so energized by the type of brain and how you're teaching me to think. Someone that was in their 40s that we did the same thing. They said now that, and he's actually become a BrainHealth cop, telling people, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, or you need to be thinking more abstractly in deeper level ways. And you're never too smart to get a little bit smarter.
So one of the things I was not smart on was to remind everyone that there will be questions at the end of this for people here, as well as for the people who are watching the streaming video. And if you're watching the streaming video, send your questions in. So what are these things that make your brain perform better as you get older? Sudoku? Would that help?
So I love, and people have different ideas. If you do Sudoku, you definitely will get better at Sudoku. Our brain tends to be very specific about what it practices. So what we're looking at is really more broad-based strategies. They talked a little bit about it in education. So it's not the specific things that we do, but really more generalized ways of thinking regardless of how we're processing information. So Sudoku, and I think there could be some trials that we look at what exactly is it doing. We at UT Dallas, we're interested in chess that can be strategic thinking, but it tends to make people better at chess, but not necessarily decision-making, judgment, the thing that's going to make them mentally independent.
I want to get back to some of these, some of the specific things, but I wanted to ask Keith, the AARP has just recently done a study about, or survey about this concern of mental acuity in older adults. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
We do them regularly, although I'm still getting over the comment about chess. I was thinking that was going to be better for me than just getting better at playing chess, and now I have to use this thing if I can do this correctly. And that is, so look at this.
So I think you can see that.
If you can see this, have a look at this chart.
And over here.
Most people think of AARP, which of course is a large member organization representing about 37 million people across the country over 50 years of age. Most people tend to think about AARP as being largely about preserving and protecting Medicare and Social Security, which is a huge concern among older Americans. Have a look at this. This is a survey done over time between 2010 and 2012, showing pretty consistent results in what people say are their top concerns. And as you'd expect, Medicare and Social Security up there in the top three. Look at the second. Staying mentally sharp is a top concern of people over 50. And then when you ask people about what interests they have, what they're either extremely or very interested in, the thing at the top of the list, staying mentally sharp, along with things like staying physically fit and spending time with family and friends. So that's a pretty persuasive indicator about how people are feeling. Now, of course, you figure a number of them are probably thinking things like, well, I want to stave off Alzheimer's. I want that magic pill, that magic recipe to prevent that. But it really is much broader than that. And people want to stay, not just go back to how they were at, what did you say, 26?
24.
But exceed that.
I remember that. Yeah. Even though you didn't. Yes.
I play chess.
Okay, you got me there. Okay, well that doesn't really surprise me that people want to stay mentally sharp. It's probably become more over time. Has become a higher and higher level concern.
Absolutely,
Right?
and I think it also reflects the sense that, an increasing number of baby boomers obviously are over 50, although I'm not necessarily wishing to acknowledge that. And as you said before, there is that, never before, I think, has such a large number of people been so concerned about the issue of staying mentally sharp.
Dr. Dockery, tell us what the McKnight Brain Research Foundation does.
Thank you. It's really kind of a love story in a way. The McKnight Brain Research Foundation was established in May of 1999 by Mrs. McKnight, and Mr. McKnight was involved with 3M about 59 years, and they had retired in the Miami area. And they were very interested in cognitive aging. And he, of course, being an executive with the 3M, and he also was president of the Surf Club, which is a prestigious social club in Miami. And he used to say to his wife as they would leave social functions, "Why is it I can't remember that person's name until after I've just left them?" So they became very interested in cognitive aging. In fact, they used to drive around on Sunday afternoons in Dade County trying to find property to build a brain institute. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 91 before this dream could be fulfilled. And as a legacy to his memory, Mrs. McKnight established the McKnight Brain Research Foundation specifically to explore and to fund research in cognitive aging as opposed to other forms of cognitive decline.
So we talk about cognitive aging. It's a kind of the elephant in the room, especially for baby boomers, is Alzheimer's. But and we'll get into that. But we're, as Sandy was saying, we're concerned as well, or maybe even more, with improving healthy brains, not just brains that are diseased with Alzheimer's or other kinds of diseases. So is that what your research institute looks at?
Yes, in fact, we have felt from the beginning, and I must say that I'm not a neuroscientist, but all of the trustees had personal knowledge of Mr. and Mrs. McKnight. So we're dedicated to fulfilling their purpose, and their purpose was to fund cognitive aging research specifically related to age-related cognitive decline, but also intended for clinical application, meaning that we would do our efforts to try to find strategies for intervention and to delay the cognitive aging and to bridge on to Dr. Chapman's initiative in terms of aging successfully. And so as a result of that, we have spent most of our time and initiatives in trying to explore those relationships to try to improve that.
Dr. Wagster, the National Institute on Aging, that's part of NIH?
That's correct.
So tell us about the state of research right now in cognitive aging. I know that's a huge question, but I think that our audience would really like to know where we are, where we come from, and what needs to be done.
So cognitive aging research, to me, at this point in history, is one of the most exciting there is out there. I think that this stems from some of the things that Dr. Chapman mentioned a few moments ago about our sort of newfound understanding of the aging brain and its resilience, or really adaptive plasticity, and the capabilities of the older brain to mount these types of plastic responses and change or adapt in relationship to maybe declines that are occurring structurally or chemically, molecularly in the brain, but in order to maintain or even gain good cognitive function as we age. So in cognitive aging research right now, it really runs the gamut. We support at the National Institute on Aging work that goes all the way from work in fruit fly models to rodent models to non-human primate models to canine models. Turns out the dog is an excellent model of cognitive aging. Has brains that are a little different than the humans, but has some similarities and has a similar behavioral repertoire, and actually naturally deposits some of the pathologies that we've come to know to be associated with Alzheimer's disease. So there are a number of animal and invertebrate models out there that we use to explore the many questions of cognitive aging. Beyond that, we also do human clinical research, and even to the level of randomized clinical trials. And so having, and studies of epidemiology. And so having this breadth of research that is also very deep in understanding molecular changes, structural changes in the brain, what is the neural profile of the aging individual, and how does that impact the outward phenotype of behavior. I just think that there's really no more exciting time than right now.
And so, but what do we know, and what do we need to know? So you talk about resilience. What does resilience actually mean? Does it mean that there's a way that the brain can resist this kind of natural decline that occurs in aging?
Well, it could mean many things, and I'm sure different researchers and different people interpret it differently. It can mean that type of thing, resistance to decline, but it also could mean some type of change, or again, amounting some type of adaptive response that could occur. There are researchers who have been trying to look into the topic of cognitive reserve. And this is also looked at many different levels. On one hand, one could see this as like depositing into a bank all of the many things, experiences, and things that you're doing right, if you will, over the years that help you build or maintain good brain function and good cognitive function. And that as you age and some of the neural substrate changes or declines in very incremental and small ways, that you could draw from that bank and draw from that reserve. But there are other ways of looking at reserve and resilience as well. And it may be that it's not just something that's a set amount that we have to draw from until we're depleted, but that there are other ways of sort of continually building this plasticity, this reserve, this resilience that will hopefully help us through life.
And on the subject of reserve, Sandy, so we just had a panel on education, in which there was a lot of emphasis on the importance of developing thinking skills as opposed to rote memory. Is that the kind of reserve that we're talking about? In other words, if I engage in kind of higher order processes in the brain, is that going to help me as I get older?
Yeah, what's interesting about the older brain is because it has this vast richness of knowledge and expertise, we literally can use that to our advantage so that we don't have to always remember the exact points on everything. So it can compensate in many ways, which is what Dr. Wagster was talking about.
Or we can use Google.
Google,
right?
yeah, now we can use Google, our technology, which we love. And I put in a lot of keywords so I can use Google when I want to. But the idea of education being, we think about early childhood, we want us to push it into middle school through high school. One thing that looks like it's protective is how much education a person has. When we look at late in life, it looks like they show less decline, but it's also the type of complexity that you're doing in your job, whether you're a community leader or leading a major corporation, the complexity of your leisure activities. So education itself is probably too short focused. It looks like it matters every single year. And what I like people to say is, your brain, this is what's surprising. We showed almost 10 years ago, for the first time, a normal person's brain, and these were older people, changing in real time after 6 hours when they went from being a novice to an expert. And all of us, you experience this constantly, and I usually use the example of a new cell phone. When you first get it, you're really mad that you got a new one because your old one, you could work just like that, really fast. When you're learning something new, a lot of your brain is activated. It looks like it's not very modular. As you become an expert very quickly, over hours, your brain becomes much more local areas are talking to each other. You're rewiring your brain. So to show that you can rewire your brain in a short period of time, regardless of age, to me is very inspirational. And I tell people, your brain doesn't stay the same for one single day. It's either moving forward or it's moving backward.
And you're saying that it can move forward even as you age, even for you go in there.
There's certain
70s,
things that
90s.
you're gonna, how much memory we have and the speed of processing that we have is gonna slow down. But your ability, one of the things that we're looking at, and a lot of research still needs to be done to look at this, but is that as we get older, this rich knowledge, expertise, if we can speed up some of these connections and get some of the brain blood flow back to the neurons that have let go, we may be able to have the best possible brain, an older brain that's working a little more efficiently. And I tell people, if I were to give you a younger brain at 25, you would beg for your brain back now.
Sorry, guess that won't work.
So the older brain is so just let's go a little bit deeper on that point. So what is the difference between the older brain and the younger brain? Healthy older brain. Healthy,
widely used, expert.
Yeah.
The older brain, it has over our lifespan the knowledge. This is one thing I think is really interesting. The older we get, we know what to ignore. The younger brain doesn't. So they take in a lot more information. You know, as we've worked across the lifespan, this is something that we don't have to teach older people. Don't pay attention to that. But the younger brain pays attention to way too much. So the older brain knows instantly, and there was a study, it was actually almost 2 decades ago, maybe longer, that gave medical information to young people, middle-aged, and older people, and they tested their memory for the medical information immediately after hearing it, a day later, a week later, a month later. The older people remembered the least when they were taught right away. The younger people were higher. By the time they were a week out, exactly the same memory. The older people knew what to remember.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to that because, and those studies are truly fascinating, I think, in terms of capability. And I don't mean to sort of cast a negative light across the room, but we do change with age in terms of our brain function, and it is diminished a bit, even in normal aging. And the behavioral phenotypes that emanate from that brain function do change with age. And we're not quite as fast as we used to be in doing certain mental calculations and activities. And we don't multitask quite as well as we used to. I think one great example of multitasking, if we want to sort of take, iPhones and iPads and all of these things, listening, talking with friends, and all of these many things that we have in today's technology-driven era. If we want to take those off the table for a moment and use an old example of multitasking, I think a wonderful one is someone cooking a meal. And I don't mean ordering from from a local restaurant. I mean actually putting a meal together where you have to prepare the food, you have different dishes that are going to be cooked for different periods of time in different ways, and you have to manage all of those things. That's a true multitasking type of event to carry it off. And yet there are many people who do that successfully and do it very well. These types of things do change as we age. They shouldn't change for those of us who are aging normally and not on a trajectory to some type of neurological disease such as dementia or Alzheimer's disease. They shouldn't change to the extent that they impact our ability to do what we need to do in everyday life and enjoy our lives. For most of us, those changes will be, we'll notice them, but they'll be somewhat imperceptible. They'll be annoying. Or irritating. You can't produce someone's name when you would like to, and that may start occurring more often. But for the most part, these are not changes that really impact your ability to do what you need to do in life and what you want to enjoy in life. I think that despite these changes, and quite frankly, much of the data shows, these studies have been repeated over and over again, that when you compare, at least cross-sectionally, from the 20s to the 30s to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that in fact you're sort of declining from those early decades even on. So your age of 24 is really, you probably declined a little more in your 30s and 40s and 50s. These changes are what we would call statistically significant. We can measure them, and the performance in that decade is a little less than it was in the performance the decade before. But again, it's not necessarily meaningful in our lives. We can measure it, it's small, it is different, but it isn't impacting our ability to do what we need to do. And yet, on top of all of this, I think the very important news, and that we have been extracting from research, and there's more that needs to be done, is that we still, and Dr. Chapman used this term just a few moments ago, it's sort of never too late. We are seeing more and more from work in animal models as well as in human clinical research that even interventions, treatments, tasks, strategies that are sort of rolled out in later life, that older adults still receive measurable benefit from them. And I think that that's an important message to take out there. I think we can sometimes, we just had the excellent panel on education, early childhood education, and how important that is and what are some of the things to consider. And there are more and more studies that are being done looking at the impact of early life factors on later life outcomes. Very important research. We need to invest in this more and find out what some of those things are. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to recognize and to push forward on the fact that your entire destiny isn't written in those very early formative years, that there is still opportunity for growth and improvement throughout the lifespan. May not be quite as overwhelming as it was when you were a very young child, but nonetheless, more and more studies have shown that this is possible, and that we are capable, both neurally and behaviorally, of mounting these kinds of improved responses.
And Lee, you were gonna say something earlier. What is your research showing about this natural decline and how we can, I don't know whether arrest it is the right term, but certainly build resilience against too much of it?
I think what we are interested in doing is trying to, number one, brand the fact that there's a difference between normal cognitive aging, if we can say normal, as opposed to diseased, influenced cognitive aging. And it's been difficult to brand the interest by science in separating those two different pathways. And so as an effort to do that, we have tried to raise the conversation to a national level and to a local, regional, and community level to try to understand the difference between them. And our primary imperative is intervention. And you gave me a wonderful ladder from that. You said it normally starts at age 42. Well, we have partnered with 4 state institutions to develop brain institutes that also was co-funded by the host institution. We've established 4 endowed chairs that are named for brain research and cognitive aging and age-related memory loss. And through the help of the Institute on Aging, National Institute on Aging, through the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, we were able to hold 2 national summits, one of which Dr. Chapman gave a wonderful presentation, and we were able to work with Dr. Wagster to produce a sentinel paper in 2010 that asked the question, what about the other 87%? And the reason for that is that Alzheimer's disease only affects 13% of the population. And to date, there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease. So if we're going to make a difference in cognitive aging and helping people to age successfully, we've got to intervene earlier. We've got to find out what's causing it and how to intervene and to do clinical translation. The important thing is that it's also, we know enough about medicine that it's multifactorial. It's not just a brain issue. It's the influences of other organ systems on the health of the brain. So if we can intervene with, for instance, of hypertension, diabetes, and others that we could name, then we're going to make a difference earlier. A very important initiative which we think is going to bring the conversation to a national level, both from the standpoint of the public interest, that will also have some influence on health policy, is a recent study that we've commissioned with the Institute on Aging, Institute of Medicine. That study was started on February 4th, and Dr. Kathy Liverman is in the audience today, who is that program study coordinator. That's going to involve a variety of systems to determine some policy about cognitive aging. We're interested in defining the term, first of all, and the epidemiology and the intervention and surveillance, and also to educate the health profession in terms of the differentiation between cognitive aging and the other disease-oriented diseases of cognition. and also to educate the public in terms of having other domains. Another thing that we really are very happy about and pleased with is that we've been able to partner with the National Institute on Aging and a research partnership in cognitive aging and collaboration with the NIA through the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health. We started that program in 2009 and funded collaborative between the Institute on Aging and the McKnight Brain Research Foundation, $28 million that funded 17 investigators. And then we now are going to be funding this again beginning in July 2014 to consider some clinical trials. So we really feel that we have to advance this conversation to a national level, both from the standpoint of diagnosis, intervention, health policy, so that we can really make a difference in the cognitive health of people that are aging as we get into people that are living longer and living beyond the 42 years when their cognitive decline begins.
And you just mentioned that, like, the magic word in Washington, which is policy. So is there, and I want to bring Keith into this, is there a specific kind of public policy around improving the health of aging Americans? And what would that look like? Besides research itself. And maybe I'll just ask Keith.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of possibilities for what one could envision doing. I mean, and policy would just be perhaps one prong of that. Think how exciting the implications are of what we've just heard about the brain's plasticity, about, you know, the things you may have done earlier in life or experiencing that's not your destiny, that you can, in fact, the research indicates, do some things. So in a way, it becomes not just a question of a policy, though certainly there are big policy questions and possibilities, but also how do you educate people? What are the tools that you can provide people? What are the things out there that actually make sense? And we all know, as this research has experienced this explosion and this rebirth in knowledge about the brain, and we all feel we're at the cusp of understanding so much more. There's also been an explosion in businesses around that, in people who are peddling this, that, and the next thing, which don't always have the scientific validation for what they're professing. Whether that be a form of brain health software that purports to do things that it doesn't, or a cure for Alzheimer's. You know, a bestseller, let's say, that says, you know, this is follow this and you will be able to prevent Alzheimer's. So the question, in a way, I think, becomes how do we engage and inspire people to live a more vital lifestyle, to be able to, you know, to have their brain health be such that they're able to do those vital things, that despite the caveats we've heard, and even with awareness of things such as the diminishment that comes with age in certain ability to do certain things, well, how can you achieve that maximum level that is possible for you? And so there are policy questions, and obviously my organization probably would be open to thinking about just about anything that is contingent and in line with the policies we have and so forth. But there are also these other questions. How do you actually engage and inspire people? How do you get them to be aware? How do you inform them in a way that is also clear about the myths, what's known, what's not known? How do you not overpromise?
Yep.
To follow on that just a bit, I think what you were just talking about is a key issue. You know, how do you get people to engage in these things? And in fact, what we call the science of behavior change is a growing area at the National Institutes of Health for how to get people to invest and essentially stick to all sorts of behavior changes, really at any age. But one might see that in the older adult, this is a particularly interesting perspective. Dr. Dockery was talking about the Institute of Medicine study that has been launched on public health dimensions of cognitive aging, again spearheaded by his foundation, and one of the many things that the foundation has done that I think has promoted insight and raised awareness about age-related cognitive decline. Part of that Institute of Medicine study is going to include a treatment or a little bit of an investigation into this science of behavior change, this field of research, and how it, so that if we determine what are maybe some of the things that we could go out to the public health, to the public community to tell people are important to engage in or move toward, the other part of that, the other hand, is how do we get people to stick to it? And what do we do to nudge them and get them interested to begin it and then stay with it? And I think that we cannot ignore the fact that this is as integral and as important a part of what we find out how to do as to get people doing it.
So I'd really like to get to some of these behavioral changes that are in a specific way. Yes.
I just want to add just a little bit, because I agree that incentivizing people to do something hasn't really been built into our system. We're really incentivized more to be sick and be repaired and go get your pill for this sickness. But if we could think about prevention and wellness, incentivize that in some way, policy, if we can get innovative people thinking about how we could do that, I think it could make a tremendous asset. So I totally agree with you. And to get us active, I mean, just to think, physical exercise is now very clear, there's study after study, that it improves memory function and increases areas in the hippocampus. And everyone's worried when they say, what am I worried about? Staying mentally sharp, the number is, I'm worried about my memory. And we now know exercise is one of the key things they can do to ramp that up. And yet, it's hard to get. So incentivizing that is going to be huge.
Okay, can we get to what the behaviors are? And I know we don't know what all the answers, but so one of them is physical exercise. But what do we want to incentivize people to do? Is it reading? Is it not multitasking? What are some of the behaviors that seem to improve cognitive function and resilience as we get older?
Yeah, so that's
Yes,
me.
you.
Okay,
You're
good.
the expert.
So in terms of strategies, we've looked at different types of strategies in our randomized trial, and a paper just came out today, in fact, in Frontiers of Systems Neuroscience, looking both in youth, our healthy aging, TBI populations, and early MCI. And it looks like when you're talking about reading, it's not just about new learning or just not about improving my memory, but it's really more, how can I learn to take in less information? One of the things that looks like it's happening, the more information you take in, the stupider it's making us, because it's too much information to process. And so if we will learn to take in information and understand it at a more abstract, what is the message from that? How can I apply it? Uses these broad-based networks very quickly, and it's why we've been able to get brain changes both in youth, healthy aging, and even in the earliest stages of early mild cognitive impairment.
I've heard you talk about this abstraction issue before, and intuitively it sounds right. But is there a way that you can, teach people? You see this, someone referred earlier to, well, I guess didn't refer specifically, but you see ads on television about, we talked about Sudoku and all that. And you can understand, okay, well, there's, maybe that's going to help me. But is there a way to actually get people incentivized to be more abstractive, if that's such a word?
Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are a lot of activities out there that are not even labeled as brain health that actually accomplish this. I mean, it may be a book club, right? Or socialization of some kinds. I mean,
Lee.
Yes, we just had an interinstitutional meeting among our 4 brain institutes, and it was a very interesting paper presented that validated what others have reported. The 2 most common things that are helpful in helping the brain age successfully is social engagement and exercise. And one of our brain institutes just presented a study on using older people and using Facebook and more passive methods of communication in a select group of people. And Facebook improved their cognition tremendously because of the socialization, the connection of a face, and they're interacting on the Facebook technology. So I think most research investigators would agree that social interaction and exercise, of course, has been proven over and over again to be the two most critical components. But I will stand to be challenged by that. But before I leave my soapbox, let me also acknowledge the other partners with the Institute of Medicine Study, which are very critical, which broadens the conversation. The AARP, the National Institute on Aging, the National Institute of Neurodegenerative Diseases and Stroke, the CDC, who's very interested in surveillance, the Veterans Administration, and I think that is all.
And we don't mean surveillance in the NSA style. So, but Facebook doesn't seem to me to be a great place to go for abstraction, diversion maybe. Is that, I mean, do you disagree with that about Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea, and when you were talking about reading or our social engagements, it looks like, you know, when you go somewhere, I say you can read 100 books and never remember anything you've read or be smarter. It's how you read and it's how you engage socially that looks like it matters to develop meaningful social relationships and to go deeper when you read so that it makes sense rather than how much I read is not necessarily making me smarter, but it's how I think about it in my own way, innovatively, because I don't want to think about everything the same way you do, and this panel all brings new ideas that enriches us. So we want the innovation to cut our brain. When someone said it earlier, our brain really is wired to be inspired from the very beginning to late life. And as we create new ideas or form new ways of thinking about information coming in, that's what makes us healthier and get excited again about, oh, I can do this. And I think Facebook, what's interesting about it is a lot of old people convince themselves, oh, I could never do Facebook. And so once they do it, this sense of accomplishment, I can learn again, is really very inspiring to them to think. And so then it connects them maybe to their family in ways that they had lost. And all of a sudden the younger generation gets excited. Grandma's doing Facebook? Oh my gosh. And now they're seeing her with smartness. So yeah, then they start getting smarter. So I think it could be adding some dimension to life that I can master something that only the younger technology can do.
And you know, we heard this word in the last panel, connection, being very important. So making connections. And I've heard you, Sandy, talk about the idea of taking disparate things and finding, you know, what makes them similar or different. So just here, okay, so here's a really simple-minded idea. So instead of like if you go out for dinner with your friends, somebody should take the lead and say, okay, tonight we're going to discuss, compare and contrast, you know, House of Cards and Parks and Recreation. I mean, if you did more of that kind of work or pleasure, do you think that would actually make our brains more resilient?
I think it will make them more engaged in mental activities in a deeper way. And we've challenged some of the groups. We've now done close to 20,000 individuals from young to old, warriors, healthy aging. And when they begin to have different conversations than just even couples, hey, how are you? Oh, fine, but you don't even have a conversation that's meaningful. But if you can say, how can I innovate and make this a more meaningful conversation? And our conversations at dinner parties tend to be very rote, which makes the brain go backwards. It really doesn't look forward it loves to do new things and have new ideas and be pushing the envelope. So even saying, what movie did you say that was, tell me, you know, what was good about it and what stunk besides just what the plot line was.
So another way to do that, you could say, no conversations about weather or sports.
Or how sick we are. No.
Or how sick we are, right. Molly?
Well, I do think that that these are not easy things to understand. Whether social engagement is a key or the key, whether physical activity is the key, mental activity or cognitive training, training on strategies on how to do things. And I know that Dr. Chapman has some very impressive research in this area of GIST-based training, which is quite important. Maybe she'll elaborate on that a little bit while we're here. But then there are studies, though, that indicate that these may not, some of the things that I just mentioned may not, rise to the level of importance or show a significant difference in sort of, controlled studies in humans and in animal models. So how do we dissect this information? How do we decide which is the most important? Some of it stems from maybe different ways in which we talked about measurement in the first panel a little bit, or testing. It may stem from the different ways that different groups measure a particular outcome, and it makes it hard for us to interpret or compare across studies when we see these differences. The other thing is that, and I believe Dr. Dockery may have mentioned this or someone else, that any one thing in isolation, while it may be very good, may not be the essential thing that is going to drive our cognitive function in a better way, or to maintain cognitive function. It may be combinations of things that are very important. And I don't think Dr. Dockery was nearly tooting his own horn enough of the many things that McKnight Brain Research Foundation has done to raise awareness, and not just awareness, but to sort of put money where the mouth is about promoting age-related cognitive decline research. And in these areas, we're looking at next, through a joint partnership with the McKnight Brain Research Foundation, the NIA and the McKnight Brain Research Foundation, we have put out a solicitation for research to come back in the form of randomized clinical trials in large numbers of individuals to look at this very thing, combinations of interventions, and whether or not a unitary treatment or intervention is as strong or stronger than a combination. It may be the combination that is the key. And so these are things that we are really trying to push the envelope on, of exploring, taking from what we already know to moving it out there and testing it, and to really see, is this the key? Is this what works? Is this the magic formula that will help move or help us maintain our function?
I'd like to turn to the audience. And if you have questions, please actually go to one of the two microphones. There's one here and there's one there. And in the meantime, I want to ask kind of a big question, which is, we talk about the protective kinds of activities that might slow the decline of the healthy brain or build up other areas. Is there activity like that can, in fact, ward off Alzheimer's or diminish its impact if you have the disease anyway, or do we just not have any idea?
Well, I definitely agree that it's not going to be a single thing that's good or the same level. It's got to be combined, whether it's our level of mental activity, physical activity, meditation, learning when not to be pushing the brain so hard. Sleep is powerful, and we heard about it in youth. We know that in terms of keeping a brain healthy, to clean out toxins, it looks like sleep is becoming one of the very robust. There are some animal models showing physical activity and mental activity do clean out some of the amyloid that could maybe extend the years of health. It may not be curing, kind of at the base core of what's causing Alzheimer's, but it can perhaps, and I think for right now, and I'd love to hear the rest of them, but I think if we can push out the number of years that we live with higher level of cognitive function and compress those where we're living in severe mental cognitive impairment, that's going to be huge. Because when we think about cancer, if you have terminal cancer, and I give you 2 years, that's everything. Well, I think also in these diseases, if we can give someone 2 more years of productive life, that's going to contribute significantly. but it may not be the cure.
Okay, I'm going to get to the rest of the panel on that same subject, but let's just hear that this woman had the first question. Could you just identify yourself and your affiliation,
Sure.
if any, and just...
Sure, I'm Jane Tilley, and I work at the U.S. Administration for Community Living, and we deal with aging and disability issues. And the morning and the entire morning, looking from what happens with children through old age, it seems to me one of the basic underlying points is it's never too late to optimize your brain function, regardless of how... I'm not saying everybody's going to be Superwoman, or Superman, but you can, at any age, you can optimize your brain function. But I did want to, the main thing I wanted to talk about was just a little bit is our agency has worked with the National Institute on Aging and the Centers for Disease Control to develop a brain health resource that'll be coming out in the next few weeks. And it's basically talks about promoting brain health. There's no, as we've heard just now, no way that we know of to prevent Alzheimer's disease. But we do, in this resource, which is vetted by Dr. Wagster and others at NIH, across NIH, we do talk about the combinations of things that seem to be related or associated with brain health. Things like falls prevention, exercise, a lot of the other things we've heard about. So I'd encourage people to take a look at that. I'd be happy to share that resource, or we, NIA, CDC, and ACL, be happy to share that resource to these folks and others. It's designed for older adults and their caregivers, but I think the basic information there actually applies to, I think, people of all ages. Mm-hmm. And maybe Dr. Wagster would want to say more about it.
Good, thank you.
It is a wonderful resource, and Jane really has been the prime mover on getting that going, and it's multifaceted, so that there are different, I believe there are even different sort of media components to it, not just in terms of slide presentations as well as fact sheets, and right, so that there are a variety of things associated with the campaign, and it really is, it's been very thoroughly vetted, and really is extremely nice. And
so
I'm
is
sure
there a website?
I sort of get torn about it. There will be a website very soon. I'm happy to take anyone's card, give you my phone number, my email address. I will be here up until lunchtime, so I would encourage people to catch me at the break. I'm happy to give it out there. We have a website, but it's not open yet, and it should be within a couple weeks.
Okay.
So.
I think one of the ideas you get from this conference is there's a lot going on in this field, and I urge, this is kind of another commercial, but I really urge everyone to take a look at Brain Health Daily, or kind of get on our list, because the amount of news like this about the brain health resource that comes out every day is pretty can be pretty exciting and maybe even overwhelming. Question.
Yes, my name is Chandra Weiland, and I will subscribe to Brain Health. I'm in my middle 50s, and I'm constantly reassessing myself and evaluating myself for early dementia and Alzheimer's. So forgive me if this seems redundant on your question, but Alzheimer's recently has been described as diabetes type 3. And although there is no preventive measures for diabetes type 1, we know that diabetes type 2 is largely lack of education, a deficit of education on nutrition and diet. So what makes Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes? Because it's, and I understand how exercises the brain, totally. But could you please tell me a little bit about diabetes type 3, why it's related to that? Because I think that gives me a little bit more insight than just exercising the brain beyond Sudoku. I've never done Sudoku, I shouldn't have said that. Thank you.
Anyone have an answer to that?
Well, I'll attempt to answer your question. That's a popular term that has turned up in recent years. I think that there may be some merit there in terms of, I think what the researchers and individuals were trying to convey in labeling something, Alzheimer's disease, as type 3 diabetes of the brain. On the other hand, I don't think that it tells us the full story and maybe leads some down the wrong path in terms of understanding what Alzheimer's disease really is. So some of that work stems from the fact that there are definite patterns of metabolic changes that occur in the brains of Alzheimer's disease in very specific brain regions that we visualize with a labeled compound and looking at the metabolic uptake of nutrients, glucose particularly in the brain, and how these change, particularly in Alzheimer's disease, in the definitive pattern. So that was one interesting piece of information. Another is that epidemiologically there seems to be higher levels of or higher risk for Alzheimer's disease in people with diabetes, particularly type 2 diabetes. This doesn't mean that everyone with diabetes has Alzheimer's disease, nor does it mean that everyone with Alzheimer's disease has diabetes, but there is some relationship there when you do these large observational studies. And then I think another piece of information is the work that's been done largely by Suzanne Kraft, used to be at University of Washington and now at Wake Forest University, where they have been delivering insulin intranasally to individuals with mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease to see if this would have the appropriate therapeutic effect. Those studies, that trial is still undergoing. There was certainly enough preliminary evidence in a pilot study to warrant going forward with a full-scale trial, which is underway. But we don't have the answer yet. We don't know what the study will tell us about that. But I think these are some of the pieces of information that get linked together, however rightly or wrongly or correctly, that have led to this terminology of Alzheimer's disease being type 3 diabetes. And so I'm not sitting in judgment on it one way or the other, but just trying to offer an explanation of where I think some of that comes from.
Very clear. Very clear.
Any other comments on that? Type 3 diabetes.
Very clear.
General.
Well, first of all, I've been waiting for the opportunity to get in front of somebody from the AARP and say, you do disservice to all of us when you keep lowering the age for who is an old person. I got to this point, and now you're including 50-year-olds for crying out loud.
But as you can tell from this panel, it's not about being old. It's about being vital. It's about understanding the real possibilities in your life.
I can just see when you were going to this 42 years old, your brain starts to deteriorate. I was thinking, maybe we ought to go to 42. Never mind.
We're going to go down to 24.
Thank you. I hope it was
Let me try to take this in a little different direction. Do we have a problem with the brain because we've decided to segment it so? When we look at it, we seem to have more stovepipes when it comes to the studying of the brain because we have made a determination that there are all these quote-unquote diseases, but as I understand it, much of the research today is indicating that many of these are related in many ways. Normal cognitive aging is that much difference from a case of dementia or a case of Alzheimer's, and when we create these stovepipes, particularly in researchers, we don't share information. We don't provide databases and ensure that the research you're doing on your particular population is shared with those that are doing research on a population that may have dementia or some other form of disease. It just seems to me that for some reason in the brain, we decided to create all these stovepipes on what is probably the most complicated, it is the most complicated organ in the body. And the way we have organized may be part of the problem why we're having such a hard time to understand it.
Yeah.
Yes, Lee.
I apologize in advance that I'm not going to be able to answer his question, but we've had part of the problem because we have felt there has not been a common way of assessing cognitive status. And as Dr. Chapman said earlier in her remarks, we can go get a health checkup, we can have our heart evaluated, we can do our stress test, we can do all those sorts of things. And I apologize to Dr. Wagster also because she's heard me say this over and over again. You know, the Healthcare Men-Para Act does permit an annual cognitive assessment. We have not had common tools for which to evaluate people's cognition. We're not speaking the same language. And fortunately, under Dr. Wagster's leadership, we have now developed the NIH toolbox to help with this. But for individual research scientists, there still is a gap in terms of the same tests, meaning the same thing, to different research scientists. So as a result of that, we've established a cognitive aging test battery working group that published their findings in the Journal of Neuroscience to standardize, at least among the McKnight Brain Institutes, the commonality of how to assess people's cognition, and trying to get to the point where a practicing physician or healthcare worker can have the tools to evaluate someone's cognition when you go in to say, do I have Alzheimer's disease, or what's happening to my mind that I can't remember that person's name when I just left them. So I think we're trying to do better, and I think you're finding now that with institutions starting brain institutes, neuroscience consortiums, that there's going to be better communication and collaboration, and that those silos are going to be working better together.
Yeah, in general, I agree with you. I think that we often segment the brain into, does it have ADHD, or was it poverty, or does it have a stroke, or, you know, what is it that's happened to the brain? And we have these silos of trying to understand. We've got to a little bit just to know what's going wrong, because one of the worst things that's happened is in Alzheimer's versus cognitive aging, where they are collapsed instead of being seen separate. But that's why when I first started thinking about the Center for Brain Health that we started almost 15 years ago now, I first thought about it as much more small, 10 years before that, and I realized that there's so many commonalities in terms of understanding how the brain can be impaired and then also how it can be repaired. So I think in this day of bioinformatics and imaging and having these large databases is going to explosively help us understand some of these issues. Where I want to move is, and it's one of my big things, is really trying to figure out not only cognitively how do we see, but our brain imaging, our different metrics when the brain goes to a healthier state. We know as we have cognitive aging, different things that go down. There's reduced brain blood flow starting in our 20s, every decade 2%. We know the connectivity decreases. We know the white matter. We know in concussions, which you're dealing with, we know in post-traumatic stress, we have these biophysiological changes. What I'm interested in is how can we begin to say, whatever it is, combo, this medication, physical exercise, mental exercise, Sudoku, what is it that's going to give us an idea? And I also agree strongly with Dr. Wagster, when you get these large databases, sometimes it clouds the individual, and we've got to know what it means meaningfully in that person's life. So all of my fancy brain imaging, if it doesn't have a meaningful change in that person's life, so I think a lot of times these well-controlled trials help us to understand that. So I love data sharing, but you've got to know who the individual behind that data is sometimes to make it meaningful. So it's how do we do the big and the individual to inform us?
And just a sort of non-scientific perspective on this too. Stovepiping is surely not just a Washington phenomenon or a scientific phenomenon at times, even within our own organization and other organizations. I mean, think about these top concerns that I said people have who are 50 years of age and older, and some who are younger. You know, as complicated as some of these issues are, health insurance or, you know, figuring out how to safeguard Medicare for the future, that is a fairly defined area. But if you think about staying mentally sharp and all of the things that we've heard and we got a sense of, that come into play there. That is by its nature, even when it comes to figuring out how to execute in a practical way for people or communicate things, it can become even more of a challenge. And internally, as we developed our approach to brain health, we ran into this too. People would say, well, what do you mean exercise? That's something else, isn't it? Or health coaching, or when we have an entire, we've developed a plan for an entire healthy living platform that encompasses a number of things, of which brain health is a piece, and there are overlaps and all of the rest. So, but that's very hard to communicate sometimes within an organization. It can be hard to communicate to the public. What are we talking about? And people like labels, like the diabetes 3. And yet in communication, effective communication, you want to find a concise, clear, and simple way of explaining what it is. So that's another challenge, even as this voyage of discovery continues.
And it's a great point, because that's actually what we're kind of trying to do here with this conference, is break down these barriers of stovepiping. So this is a conference about education, it's aging, it's as we'll see, traumatic brain injury, and there are themes that are developed across all of these different areas. And I think that's one of the great things about the Center for Brain Health, is that it's not just concentrating on one or the other. You have a question?
Good morning. My name is Olivia Chase, and I am a grandparent raising a grandchild. And so my brain questions range across the whole spectrum this morning as to are there programs, practices, and policies you guys are looking at for intergenerational families? Children that are developing their brain aspirations while the other side of the equation is trying to decline in brain problems. So I'm very, very interested in promoting activities and policies for intergenerational families.
I can speak to a program that actually has been supported research-wise through the National Institute on Aging, and I believe has been picked up by AARP to help spread this program now that the initial research has been done throughout cities in the United States. The research is called Experience Core, and it had started out, I think it's spread to other cities now, but what I do know about it, I was not directly involved in the research or even in the administration of it, so I'm speaking for a few people removed, but nonetheless, this was a project in which in the city of Baltimore, in public schools within the city, they paired older adults, not necessarily grandparents or people who were relatives of the children or friends, but older adults who were interested in participating in this research with young children in the classroom, primarily to help as help the children on particular projects, reading, giving them a little bit extra special attention. Well, interestingly enough, there are a lot of other things that happened as the older adults had to maneuver to deliver these types of services. They had to ride the bus or somehow get to the public school that probably was not in their neighborhood. They had to go into the classroom and sit in the small chairs that the elementary school children were sitting in, so there was, a fair amount of agility and physical activity of getting up and down. They had to engage socially with these children. They had to engage intellectually with the children, but also with other teachers in the classroom setting who were delivering to these older adults, what kind of program we want you to carry out. It wasn't just a come and read type of thing. There was a structure that these older adults were carrying out with these younger children. And it was for a few hours a day and over a period of time that this activity occurred. There were a lot of people, they had to have their non-active control group to compare these older adults with in terms of how they fared. And there were, I understand, for those who were in the non-active control, they were beating at the door, wishing they could be part of the program. But nonetheless, in the end, the initial results that came out of it was that this was this multi-dimensional, multi-activity type of program did definitely benefit the older adults in terms of in this case, one of the major outcomes was cognitive function. They were able to do some brain imaging on a very small number of the individuals who were in that initial study. And so that, I think it has the trend or tendency to look as if there were improvements in areas of the brain that would indicate that had been some adaptive plasticity and improvement in structural function, structure in the brain, not structural function, but structure in the brain. So a number of positives that came out for the older adults. They also looked at the impact on the children, and there were positive impacts there. I don't know exactly what measures or what metrics they were using for the young children, other than to know in general that there were positive impacts. But this Experience Core program, I don't know if anyone else from AARP is familiar with it, but I do believe that AARP has picked this up and has taken the protocol or the curriculum and now moved it out, less in a research manner, but more in terms of a implementation manner in other cities in the United States. I don't know for how long that has been going on.
And I would just add quickly to that, no, that's tremendous, because one of the things our brain that's also very strong to drive it forward is a sense of purpose and meaning. And so this type of giving back and all of a sudden your life means it does everything to inspire the brain to move forward. So we talked about motivation with kids, and you can think about these individuals that didn't really have the motivation or see their purpose. They feel it then every day, and purpose and motivation is huge.
That's a very important point from this too.
I think just speaking personally, as far as intergenerational, these connections, I have found that in the last 20 years or so, I've really enjoyed working with younger people. And I sort of make it a point to do that. And maybe as I get older, that's inevitable, right? But I'm just wondering whether that is a way to build resilience and regeneration, almost literally.
Yeah, I think the mentorship that comes and learning both. I mean, one of the things that we see as we're working with corporate America a lot, unfortunately, is a lot of boomers are being the frontal lobes of the younger generation, 20 and 30-year-olds. So we're trying to train them to learn from them more like this, but squeeze the potential out of them to be the next generation of innovators and have responsibilities that are going to build this kind of abstraction and leadership and planning and goals. Because that's what's happened is our youth are coming out of colleges now, and they've gotten so good at being great at our technology and giving us all the information we want right in front of us. So the mentorship of older, to make sure that we're sharing and having them do the heavy thinking at the same time, so learn from us and we learn from them, is great.
We're happy to take more questions from the floor. Yes.
Thank you so much. This has been so informative today. It's really been a great panel. I've learned a lot from it. I'm maybe one of the only lay people here, but I'm thinking about the practical applications of what I'm learning today in running my business. And I want to be better at that. And although I have in the past been proud of the fact that I'm a multitasker, what I learned from Dr. Chapman is that I'm actually not getting to the higher level functioning that I need to be to look at a spreadsheet or to solve a thorny personnel problem. And instead I'm impeding my growth by trying to listen to my business partners at the same time I'm checking my email. So I wonder, Dr. Chapman, if you could talk a little bit about what would be a better strategy for an executive that's trying to figure out how to do several things at one time to be productive, but also to provide that extra brain power that you need to do something that doesn't just require some rote behavior, but actually requires stimulation of your brain.
So when we talk about multitasking, there's kind of 3 levels. One is multitasking, like when you're driving and you're having to pay attention to a lot of information, like the cars next to you and the lights. When it's all focused on one thing, that's a good thing, right? You can multitask while you're driving, but you shouldn't be on your cell phone, because then it's 2 big things that have a different target. So when I talk about and sometimes when you're multitasking, one's automatic, like, and then you can do it. But when it's 2 things that really matter to you, you're actually, and the science is pretty clear, that you're using more brain power, more of the brain. You're toggling back and forth, because our brain is not really wired. Now, the issue of can it be wired? Yes, it can. And that's why we think the brain is wired by how you use it to quickly toggle back and forth so it tricks us. But it actually makes us much more brain fatigued. And what we've trained people to do is if you'll do interval training, 15 minutes on this and 15 minutes on that, one thing at a time, you actually complete your task better, you're more productive, and you have less errors, and the product is more efficient. Corporations, Intel, challenge their employees. They think we've created a monster, and so they quit letting people have access to email because that seemed to be the pings and the pongs, and they became much more productive when they didn't have access to that. So it doesn't have to be like 2 hours. You have to sit here and be focused on one thing. But when you're doing something that you don't want to make errors on, and the other big thing we teach people to do is at the start of your day, know what are the most weighty things that are going to make you feel like this is going to make me feel productive, and I'm going to spend my brain downtime or energy on doing those first. And then when you're doing the other random things that you could make mistakes on, it's not going to be, that awful. Those we call them when you're hunting elephants, don't get distracted chasing rabbits. But most people take care of their rabbits first because they're fast. You take them off, and then by the time you're ready to do your elephants, you're brain dead. So it's really kind of being strategic of thinking deeper and using your time.
And Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of strategy is not only does it improve your functioning, your kind of real-time functioning, you get more done, but it actually helps you in the longer term to build the kind of resilience that we're talking about?
That's what we think. And the 9 strategies that we teach individuals, that kind of builds when I talk about abstract thinking, this is kind of the basic. You've got to be able to do this before you can think deeper. So, yeah.
By the way, that's not somebody's cell phone going off. It's St. John's Church. Yes.
My name is Jim Parks, and I'm an executive coach, and so I'm kind of an applied neuroscientist. And so the idea really is that to help people who are already functioning at a high level, how can they improve? And one of the things that I tell them, I said, as a leader, you not only judge on the basis of what you do, but for what you don't do. And here's the math on what you don't do. And that is if in an 8-hour period you're making a digital decision every 15 minutes, that's 32 decisions to do something. But it's 2 to the 32nd power of all the things that you're not doing. And so as you're aging, you're making a lot of those decisions about what you don't do. And so it gives me the question about brain hemisphere dominance and the ability to have the whole brain integration as a key component of an aging brain being healthy and functioning well.
So,
Yeah.
actually, that brings up interesting. Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we hear a lot about left brain. Are you talking about hemispheres? Left brain, right brain? What is there? Is there anything to that?
Yeah, I say that that's a myth that we kind of believed early on. There are certain parts of our left brain, right brain that become dominant, but you really want your brain, both sides, working integrally to do something. So this notion of left brain, right brain is, if you've had a hemispherectomy, it's true. But if not, you don't want to be left brain, right brain. You really want to be, and you shouldn't be the big idea and the detail person. You've got to be able to see things through to keep pushing the frontier through. So, absolutely. Whole brain integration, but I loved what you said, and we say make a stop doing list. If we can learn to take our information downloading that's getting more and more information rapidly, to take in 80% less information, you will see a brain that is more energized, goes deeper, and spreads. So, and people say, how can you do that? Because I do research in aging, TBI, school kids' reasoning, and poverty. But if I focused on it all, I wouldn't have a very good knowledge of everything. So, and especially coaches, and that's why I'm mentoring young people to take on these leadership, squeezing the potential, let them lead meetings, let them kick it off, to use innovative ways to kick in things that's going to actually help strengthen their brain performance.
Any comments? Yes, Doctor.
Just wanted to mention, I don't know if all of you saw it, but there's a section in today's Wall Street Journal on the executive brain, and you might want to refer to that. And I didn't get to read the article because I didn't have time, but I'm going to read it later. But I think there were two twists to it. One is the level of cognition efficiency of the aging executive, as well as managing your brain as an executive. So I think there are two very important components in that people would be interested in reading.
Good. I love those terms, the efficiency and the energy that comes when you are more efficient.
So are there any more questions from the floor? I've got a few.
There's one back
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Oh,
Yes?
She's back
Yes,
there.
I'm sorry. Who
Back
has the
there,
question?
one back
Oh,
there.
back there. Come on up to the microphone. It's okay.
So you talk about exercise, and I'm just curious if there are specific exercises that are targeted to increase cognitive development, and if anybody works with physical therapists to work on that, like the other, I don't know, eye-hand coordination things, so it would help with some of that.
And let me add to that, because I was talking to somebody here about meditation. Can we also throw that into the mix? So specific exercises, meditation, does that help the brain?
There are studies that are, meant to be targeted to certain parts of the brain that help with certain levels.
Good.
Just curious. Thank you.
Anybody want to answer that?
Well, I'll offer a little bit.
And then I'll step in.
So the physical activity, it would seem from the studies that have been done to date in older adults and its impact on cognitive function, so we'll narrow it down to that, older adults, cognitive function, impact of physical activity, that aerobic activity, largely in the form of what has been tested in the form of brisk walking several times a week, has a positive impact on cognitive function, and it also has an impact that we've been able to measure on brain structure and function. The impact on brain structure and function, we've been able to dig a little bit more deeply by looking at animal models of physical activity on cognitive function. But we've also, through neuroimaging, been able to capture some of that impact as well, all in the positive direction. A lot of times those studies are the control group, if you will, so that we know whether or not it's just some type of activity or even social interaction, that you're working with someone, you're exercising, maybe the social interaction is what's driving the positive cognitive response. So typically these studies will pit what they call a toning and stretching or non-aerobic physical activity group with a group that is engaging in this aerobic activity that's enough to get your heart rate up, and so the capacity of oxygen intake, but still a moderate. You're not running a marathon, you're not performing a triathlon or something like that. And what they've consistently seen is that it's the aerobic activity group that shows the gains, that shows the improvement. So that's one area that we could probably point to and say that this is the type of activity that's important. But there have been some other, at least one I know, and I can't quote you specifically, but a somewhat recent study in the last couple of years in which they found that the toning, stretching type of activity improved cognitive function in older adults. So we can't completely discount that. It's hard to know what all of the elements are that might have driven the improvement there. Most of these studies are conducted in social groups, but generally they will conduct their toning and stretching and their aerobic activity both in social groups so that they can at least hold that social aspect constant. So that's another thing that we don't know how it might figure into the whole physical activity realm because we've been holding that constant for so long. Finally, and there may be other activities that Dr. Chapman can speak to, but just focusing on these, the most of the research that we have that has come out of this area has been from a handful of labs. So that we've got one lab in particular at University of Illinois that has really been the leader. This group of scientists have been the leaders in studying this phenomenon in older adults. But their studies typically are relatively small, a few hundred people, maybe a couple of hundred people at most, hey, it's reality. You know, it's how much money and how much time you have to run all of these people. These also are studies that are for relatively short periods of time. So there are many things that we don't know about what a prescription for physical activity would be for an older adult. And it may differ from, from one person to another. So we don't know yet how to tell people what type of activity, although aerobic activity is up there at the top, for how long, or like as in how many times a day, or excuse me, how many times a week, for how long each time, for how many months, for how many years. Should we ever expect that if you engage in this type of activity for a few months and then stop, that it will confer some lifelong, positive function on your brain or cognition? It might, but there are many unanswered questions at this point, and I think it's still an active area of research because it's a very important one, and answers to, other types of physical activity, other things that we can engage in. Not all people can walk several times a day for a variety of several times a week for a variety of reasons. So the more that we know, the better positioned we are to be able to offer, I think, very descriptive advice for individuals and their needs.
Yeah, and I would just add real quickly that we published a study with exercise. We're just getting ready to do where we compared it versus the cognitive training. What's the difference that you get? And we got it very early. The physical exercise changed. The mental exercise, we showed changes across whole brain areas much more rapidly. But to think that in literally 6 weeks, you could get this dramatic change both in immediate and delayed memory, as well as changes in the hippocampus, is phenomenal. And it was the first time to show it that quick because the studies have gone longer. But it looks like you've got to do both, so it's not physical or mental, because they both engage the brain in very different ways. There was another study, just that I want to bring up that wasn't ours, that showed that people that had stairs in their home, the number one thing that predicted if they had high cognitive function was people with stairs versus not stairs. So it looks like keep moving is probably good for you, because it makes you do things that you wouldn't do otherwise, except the falls, as you mentioned, because falls is the number one cause of concussions. So it's kind of this balance between physical activity and falls. How do we handle that?
Just anecdotally, though the research is impure, but for the layman who wants to have an exercise program, it's suggested 30 minutes, 5 days a week is the best system for planning your exercise. And one of the investigators that does have a large study through the NIH suggests that the faster you walk, the better you improve your cognition. So, and also apparently predicts longevity too. So the faster you walk, the longer you live, and the better your cognition.
Very good.
And so even if the research isn't pure, it's probably still a good idea for other reasons.
Oh, I wouldn't go there.
Well, thank you, panel. You did a great job.
Yeah, thank you.
So stay there. We're going to break for lunch, but first we're going to do toning and stretching, because we can't do aerobics in here. Well, I guess we could, but so we're going to take a break, and then are the tables going to be set? Okay, so take a break. Tables will be set for lunch. We'll hear from Senator Grassley, Congressman Fatah, have the presentation of the award, and we will see you back here. Thank you.